The clinking of glasses and low murmur of conversation filled the dimly lit restaurant, a place that whispered wealth and exclusivity with every candle flickering atop the tables. Ethan slipped off his tailored coat, handing it to the maitre d', with the same casual authority he used in boardrooms. His dark eyes swept the room once, confirming that no familiar faces lingered here tonight. He had chosen this place carefully, a sanctuary where secrets could be dressed up in crystal stemware and hidden beneath white tablecloths. Across the table, Celeste leaned forward, her lips curved into a knowing smile. She was striking in a red silk dress that shimmered against the golden glow of the chandelier above them. Every detail about her seemed curated to remind him why he risked everything: the confidence in her gaze, the way she laughed without restraint, and the way her hand rested lightly on his as though it belonged there. "You always find the perfect places," she purred, her voice soft enough that only he could hear. Ethan smirked, signaling the waiter to pour them another glass of wine. "Only the best, for us." The waiter moved gracefully, filling their glasses with a vintage Bordeaux, and then withdrew with the silence of a man well trained not to notice too much. Ethan raised his glass, the deep red liquid catching the light as he toasted. To tonight, Celeste echoed, her eyes glittering as their glasses met with a soft chime. The first sip was smooth, warming Ethan's chest, but the real intoxication came from watching Celeste lean back, one elegant leg crossing over the other. He felt a rush of pride, almost arrogance. This was his secret indulgence, his proof that life could be bent to his will. At home, Isabella was steady, loyal, predictable, but Celeste was fire, unpredictability wrapped in perfume and silk. Their meal began with oysters, a detail Celeste had insisted upon. She tipped one shell back, savoring it slowly, her lips glistening as she set it down. Ethan chuckled under his breath, captivated, and reached across the table to brush his thumb against her wrist. She didn't pull away. Instead, she met his gaze boldly, daring him to forget everything else but her. "You look like a man who owns the world," she teased, her voice dripping with both admiration and mischief. "I do own it," Ethan replied smoothly, though the way his chest puffed suggested he believed it more than he should. "And what's the point of owning the world if I can't share it with you?" The words made her smile widen. She loved his confidence, his hunger, the sense that he could break rules and rewrite them. Ethan, in turn, loved the way she made him feel: powerful, desired, untouchable. Tonight, it was as if the restaurant itself existed for them, the music playing just softly enough to be romantic, the waitstaff orchestrating each course like a private performance. When the main course arrived, filet mignon perfectly seared, Ethan barely touched his fork at first. He was too busy watching Celeste, his attention locked on every detail: the sparkle of her earrings, the delicate curve of her neck, the soft laughter that escaped when he whispered some joke meant only for her. The world outside, the meetings, the deals, his wife waiting at home, faded into irrelevance. "You know this can't last forever," Celeste said suddenly, her tone playful yet edged with truth. She twirled her fork idly, her eyes searching his. Ethan leaned forward, lowering his voice to a promise. "As long as I want it to, it will. No one will ever find out." This, he gestured between them, is untouchable. She smiled again, reassured, and lifted her glass to her lips. But for the briefest second, Ethan caught something flicker in her eyes: doubt, maybe, or fear. He dismissed it as quickly as it came. Tonight was theirs, and he would not let the shadow of consequences spoil it. The candles flickered, the wine flowed, and Ethan allowed himself to believe in his own invincibility. Little did he know, just beyond the restaurant's grand doors, the perfect world he had built around lies was already beginning to crack. The air inside the restaurant shifted the moment the grand double doors opened. A crisp draft slipped in, followed by the unmistakable sound of heels striking marble. Ethan lifted his glass lazily, mid-sentence, but the look in Celeste's eyes, sharp and suddenly tense, made him pause. He followed her gaze toward the entrance, and in that instant, the color drained from his face. Isabella, his wife, glided into the room, her presence commanding enough to turn heads though she wore no more than a simple black dress. It wasn't the jewels or the designer cut that made her striking, it was the quiet strength in her bearing, the way she carried herself like someone who didn't need to shout to be noticed. Her hair, swept elegantly back, revealed a pair of diamond studs he himself had bought years ago, back when their love was less complicated, before power and temptation had seduced him into darker paths. And then Ethan's eyes shifted to the man at her side. Adrian, tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of effortless charisma that made people lean closer when he spoke. His hand rested lightly on Isabella's back as though guiding her, but the ease between them suggested something more than polite familiarity. Laughter curled from her lips at something Adrian whispered, and Ethan's gut twisted in a way he had not expected. Celeste stiffened across the table. "That's your wife," she breathed, panic flashing in her eyes. Ethan's hand tightened around the stem of his glass, threatening to shatter it. "What the hell is she doing here?" he muttered, his voice low, almost feral. But Isabella didn't falter. She scanned the restaurant, her gaze inevitably locking onto Ethan's table. For a fraction of a second, he thought she might crumble, that the sight of her husband dining so openly with another woman would break her. But no, her chin lifted higher. A smile, cool and deliberate, curved her lips. And then, to Ethan's horror, she tugged Adrian closer and whispered something that made him laugh in return. The maitre d', oblivious to the storm brewing, escorted Isabella and Adrian to a table not far from Ethan's. Close enough that every glance could sting, every movement could provoke. Isabella sat gracefully, crossing her legs with composure, while Adrian pulled out her chair. The very gesture, the kind of courtesy Ethan had long forgotten, burned like acid in Ethan's throat. Celeste shifted uncomfortably. "This isn't good. She'll make a scene." Ethan forced a tight smile, his voice dripping with false calm. "She won't. Isabella doesn't do scenes." Yet his heart pounded. The calmness in his wife's demeanor was worse than rage. Rage he could have countered, soothed, manipulated. But this silence, this icy control, it was a weapon he hadn't prepared for. As the evening unfolded, Ethan found it impossible to focus on Celeste. Every time Isabella laughed, every time Adrian leaned toward her, jealousy ignited like sparks in his chest. Celeste noticed his distraction, her own face tightening with resentment. She hadn't signed up to be a shadow in the presence of his wife, she was supposed to be the center of his world tonight. Finally, Isabella rose from her seat. The restaurant seemed to pause, as though holding its breath. She walked toward Ethan's table, Adrian following with quiet confidence. Ethan straightened in his chair, his carefully built composure threatening to collapse under the weight of her approach. "Ethan," Isabella greeted, her voice calm, controlled, but laced with something razor-sharp beneath the surface. She turned her gaze to Celeste, offering a polite but cutting nod. "And this must be dinner." Celeste flushed, lowering her eyes, but Isabella didn't linger on her. Instead, she gestured toward Adrian. "This is my husband, Adrian." The words landed like a grenade. Ethan's jaw tightened, his hand flexing against the tablecloth. He opened his mouth to protest, to demand an explanation, but nothing came. He could only stare as Isabella slid her hand into Adrian's with ease, her smile cool and devastating. In that moment, Ethan realized she had seen his betrayal long before tonight. And she hadn't come here to break, she had come here to strike back. The silence after Isabella's words stretched like a taut wire, humming with tension that everyone at the nearby tables could feel but dared not acknowledge. Ethan's chest rose and fell, his mind scrambling to catch up with what he'd just heard. "My husband, Adrian." The phrase replayed in his head, cruel and deliberate, a mirror held up to his own infidelity. Celeste shifted in her seat, suddenly small despite the boldness of her red dress. Her eyes darted from Isabella to Adrian to Ethan, as though trying to decide whether she should speak, apologize, or simply vanish into the velvet shadows of the restaurant. The confidence that had carried her earlier, the playful teasing, had dissolved under Isabella's calm gaze. Ethan leaned forward, gripping the edge of the table. "Isabella," his voice cracked, raw, nothing like the smooth control he was accustomed to. "What is this?" Isabella tilted her head, the faintest of smiles curling her lips. "Dinner," she said softly, her tone deceptively simple. Her hand remained intertwined with Adrian's, their fingers laced together with an intimacy that made Ethan's stomach clench. "The same as yours, I suppose." Adrian, tall and unbothered, inclined his head toward Ethan. "Pleasure to see you," he said, his voice calm, carrying the steady assurance of a man who feared nothing. His eyes, however, held a glint of challenge. Ethan's jaw tightened. He wanted to rise, to shout, to tear away the hand Isabella held so easily in another man's grasp. But he was trapped by the restaurant's walls, by the watchful eyes of strangers, and most of all, by his own lies. For years, he had played his wife for granted, assuming her silence was ignorance. But tonight, silence had transformed into a blade sharper than any outburst could have been. Celeste reached for Ethan's arm, whispering, "Maybe we should leave." Her tone was urgent, pleading, as if she knew she was nothing more than collateral in the storm. But Ethan shrugged her off, his pride refusing to retreat. "No," he said firmly, though his voice trembled. We're not going anywhere. Isabella arched a brow, her composure flawless. Then perhaps we should join you. The suggestion landed with a shock. Adrian's smile widened faintly, as though amused by the entire spectacle. Before Ethan could respond, Isabella pulled out a chair at the table, sitting down gracefully across from him. Adrian followed, settling beside her. Now the four of them sat together, two couples locked in a battle of unsaid words. The waiter, poor man, approached uncertainly with a tray of desserts, his eyes flickering nervously between them. Isabella thanked him with poise, as though nothing unusual was happening, then picked up a fork and tasted a delicate slice of chocolate cake. Delicious, she remarked, her voice light, yet each word was a deliberate performance. Ethan's pulse hammered. His lover sat beside him, stiff and uneasy, while his wife shared desserts with another man as if she had every right to. His jealousy roared inside him, louder with each laugh Isabella gifted Adrian, louder still each time Adrian leaned close to whisper something in her ear. The more Ethan tried to reclaim his composure, the more it slipped away, unraveling thread by thread. Finally, Ethan snapped, his voice harsh. This isn't a game, Isabella. Her fork clinked against the plate as she set it down, her eyes meeting his with piercing clarity. No, she agreed, her voice like steel wrapped in silk. It's not a game, but you were the one who decided to gamble. The truth in her words landed heavier than he expected. Around them, the restaurant hummed on, but for Ethan, the world had narrowed to this table, this confrontation. Celeste lowered her gaze, her presence shrinking further, while Adrian's hand rested protectively over Isabella's, steady and unyielding. Ethan felt the walls closing in. For the first time in his life, the billionaire who had always been untouchable realized that power and money could not shield him from the consequences of his own betrayal. And in Isabella's calm defiance, he saw something he had never recognized before: freedom. Ethan's hand trembled as he set down his wine glass, the stem nearly snapping under the pressure of his grip. The image before him was unbearable, Isabella's fingers resting calmly in Adrian's, her eyes no longer heavy with pain but lit with quiet certainty. She wasn't the betrayed wife anymore, she was the woman who had chosen her dignity over his deception. Celeste could barely sit still beside him. She tapped her nails against the tablecloth, her voice hushed but sharp. Ethan, this is madness. Let's just leave. But Ethan didn't move, he couldn't. The billionaire who had once commanded empires now sat rooted in place, staring across the table at the one person he could not control. Isabella leaned back in her chair, poised, unshaken. Do you know what's funny? She asked softly, her gaze fixed on Ethan. For so long, I told myself that silence was strength. That if I looked away, you'd come back to me eventually. That my loyalty would remind you of your own. She shook her head, a rueful smile tugging at her lips. But all silence ever did was give you permission. Ethan opened his mouth, but no words came. The confident speeches, the excuses he had once rehearsed in case he was caught, they all evaporated in the face of her calm resolve. Adrian rested his hand more firmly over Isabella's. You don't have to explain yourself to him, he said gently. His voice wasn't mocking, but it carried a finality that stung Ethan more than any insult could have. Adrian wasn't competing, he wasn't posturing, he was simply there, steady, present, filling the void Ethan had created. The realization clawed at Ethan's chest. Isabella, please, he said at last, his tone cracking under the weight of desperation. You can't mean this. He's not your husband. I am. Her eyes softened for a fleeting second, but then hardened again. A husband, she repeated, her tone sharp but controlled. A husband is a partner. Someone who cherishes, protects, and values the woman by his side. Tell me, Ethan, when was the last time you were that man to me? The question silenced him. He searched his memory, but all he could find were board meetings, late nights, whispered excuses, and Celeste's laughter filling the spaces where his wife's should have been. Celeste shifted uncomfortably, sensing the crumbling of the illusion she had clung to. She finally stood, her voice low but clear. I won't be a part of this. Without waiting for Ethan's response, she slipped away, her heels clicking against the polished floor until she disappeared into the night. Ethan barely noticed. His eyes never left Isabella. I can fix this, he whispered, almost pleading. Whatever you want, I'll do it. I'll end everything. Just don't walk away from me. Isabella's gaze lingered on him for a long, heavy moment. Then she rose from her chair, Adrian rising with her. She smoothed the folds of her dress with practiced grace, as though sealing away any trace of hesitation. I already walked away, Ethan, she said quietly, though her words carried like thunder in his ears. You just never noticed. With that, she slipped her arm through Adrian's, and together they turned toward the door. The restaurant seemed to part for them, other diners averting their eyes, sensing the gravity of the moment. Isabella never looked back. Ethan remained seated, the world around him blurring into meaningless shapes and sounds. For years, he had believed himself untouchable, invincible, a man above consequence. But now, staring at the empty chair across from him, he realized that money, power, and charm could not rebuild what had been broken. He had lost not just his wife, but the one thing he had always assumed was his by right, her love. And as the echo of Isabella's footsteps faded, Ethan understood that for the first time in his life, he was truly alone.